Zubin, my goal is to learn to code.
Oh dear, that's not going to be a goal that helps you succeed.
A lot of people, for example, will write SQL queries as part of their work. Now, that arguably is a form of coding, but it's definitely not software engineering. And SQL is not really a coding language. It's a query language. I guess it's a subtype of coding languages, but it's not a general purpose programming language, and neither is HTML and CSS. So we really need to understand, when we say coding, do we include things like data science? Do we include things like cybersecurity professionals who can write a few scripts? Welcome to Easier Said Than Done with me, Zubin Pratap, where I share with you the tens of thousands of dollars worth of self-development that I did on my journey from 37-year-old lawyer to professional software engineer. The goal of this podcast is to show you how to actually do those things that are easier said than done. Hey guys, I wanted to talk to you today about why learning to code is a bad goal, but being a coder or a programmer is not. There's a huge distinction, and that's what we need to talk about today. But for that, let me just quickly switch over to my screen share. As you guys know, I like to share a screen that has the main talking points so that you guys can take a look at this document later on and guide your own thoughts. So let's start by understanding what learning to code actually means, right? Because if I'm going to say that learning to code is not a great goal, let's understand what learning to code even means. And for that, let's start by saying, well, what do we actually mean by coding? The problem with these kind of terms that become goals is that they're actually very imprecise and so vague as to be fundamentally useless. The problem with vague goals is that you'll spend a lot of time, you'll waste a lot of time doing things that don't actually matter. So let's start with, what do we mean by coding? Now, coding, in my opinion, is much broader than, let's say, software programming or engineering. Programming and engineering, in my view, are quite similar. There's small theoretical differences, but as a job description, they're kind of the same thing. But coding could mean all kinds of things, from a little bit of scripting, like using a terminal or Linux or Bash scripting for something, to actually writing entire programs, right? Or things in the middle, like data science and data analytics often use a little bit of Python scripting, or quite a lot of Python scripting, some other form of scripting. And those are not really full-on programming roles, but they are roles that involve writing some code. A lot of people, for example, will write SQL queries as part of their work. Now, that arguably is a form of coding, but it's definitely not software engineering. And SQL is not really a coding language. It's a query language. I guess it's a subtype of coding languages, but it's not a general purpose programming language, and neither is HTML and CSS. So we really need to understand, when we say coding, do we include things like data science? Do we include things like cybersecurity professionals who can write a few scripts, probably quite technical, with system administration and command line stuff, but maybe not able to write full-on programs? I would argue that coding includes all of those. So you need to be really clear. When you say coding, do you mean data analytics, data science, cybersecurity, or any of the other things that come in between, right? For example, front end, a little bit of front end design work, not front end software engineering, but front end design work could involve the use of HTML and CSS and maybe a little bit of JavaScript. But if you're not able to build an entire production application, or even if you're not able to build a proper software application, maybe you're not a generalist programmer, right? So we need to understand what we mean by coding. Next, what do we mean by learning to code? And what does that actually mean? How do you know when you've achieved this goal? Is someone who's done, let's say, a month or 30 days or 60 days or 90 days of Python or something else, I would argue they know they've learned to code. They've learned the basics. Just like someone who's learned how to read and write is literate doesn't mean that they're skilled, okay? The example I like to sort of think of to reason by analogy is, just because you and I know how to read and write English or another language doesn't make us authors or poets or journalists or technical writers in that subject, right? So when we say learning to code, what does that actually mean? How much is enough? This is one of the big challenges with a goal like that. So then let's start at the end and say, well, if learning to code is not a great goal, is not a defined well enough goal, then what are good goals? What are properly defined goals? Well, we can use the SMART system. Now, of course, everyone is going to say it's a cliche. I'm a big fan of cliches, because cliches achieve the status of being cliches because they're true, okay? And they're so true that people tend to take them for granted. So let's consider what SMART goals are, right? For those of you who don't know, it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, okay? So they have to be specific, measurable, they have to be achievable goals. I kind of disagree in this. For example, when I went from a 37 lawyer to a software engineer at Google in a couple of years, when I started out, I didn't necessarily think that was achievable, right? It wasn't an express goal of mine. So I'm a little skeptical, let's say, about whether it has to be achievable, because I kind of think that achievable is a question of time and effort and commitment, because all skills are learnable. And you ask yourself too early whether something is achievable. You ask a baby whether it can lift or bench press 250 kilos. It's achievable in due course if you train it, but not as a baby. And so you're not going to set those goals. So anyway, I digress. The other aspect is R&T, relevant and time bound. So it has to be relevant to you, to your values. There's a whole lot of work that needs to go into getting that right, because a lot of people, I did this too, choose initial careers like the law for reasons other than their true values. Okay, it may not be something you want. So it has to be a relevant goal, relevant to you, and that's a personal thing. And it has to be time bound, which is there's no point saying I'm going to learn to code this year. That's kind of useless. You need to say I'm going to learn to code X, Y, Z by the 30th of April, for example. But let's break that down into more detail, especially S&M, the specific and measurable aspects, right? Now, in the context of good goals, a goal has to be specific, meaning you need to know exactly what it looks like. Why is this so important? I think this is the number one rule of good goal setting, is it has to be so specific that you know clearly whether you've achieved it or not. Now, when you say learning to code is a goal, you will never know clearly. Why? Look, I've been programming for what, 4 or 5 years now, and I'm still learning to code. Every day I'm learning something new, and that's the joy of programming, right? So if learning to code is my goal, then arguably I still haven't achieved it, but that sounds ridiculous because it's not specific enough. So you need to make it specific. In my example, when I was shutting down my startup and I taught myself to code to keep my startup alive because my technical co-founder quit, I decided that I was going to restart my career. I was not going to go back to the law. I was going to go straight into a developer role. I was almost 40 at that time. And so for me, being specific meant not learning to code. For me, being specific meant getting a full stack role, hired as a full stack developer. That was the goal. Now, how much I needed to learn to get to that was another question that I had to develop, but my goal is specific. At any point of time, I would know whether I achieved it or not. If I'm not employed, I haven't achieved my goal. If I haven't got a single job offer to be a developer, even if I don't accept it, if I get an offer, then at least that means I have learned enough to be commercially valuable to the company, which means it's a specific goal. So at any day, I could know, have I hit my goal? Have I not hit my goal? If I just set the goal as learning to code, well, after about 3 weeks, you've learned something. So you kind of hit your goal, but it's not good enough for anything useful, right? So super specific. How specific? Specific that you know whether you've achieved it. Because one of the most important things is knowing whether you achieved it. Okay, it's right here. Now, would you be happy learning to code, spending 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, 2 years learning to code, learning a lot of stuff, knowing a lot of stuff, but never getting a job? No. And that's because it's not a specific goal. Learning to code is not a specific goal. There's no end line to this goal, right? Plus, when you set the goal more specifically, you suddenly realize there's a whole different level you need to get to. For example, if I wanted to say, hey, I want to be a professional soccer player, that's a different goal from saying I want to learn how to play soccer. I want to learn how to play soccer is way lower as a goal than I want to be a professional soccer player, because then learning to play soccer is just the starting point and a number of other steps. Exactly the same with coding, software engineering, or data science, whatever you want to call it. It's not enough to say I want to learn Python. Like when I went to Google, I didn't know any of the languages that I was going to write in, okay? That's not the point. The point is to be good enough at a professional level to beat the competition at the collection of skills that the target companies want. So saying I want to learn a language, not enough. I want to learn React, not enough. I want to learn a bit of JavaScript or Python or Golang or whatever, not enough. It's a composite skill, okay? So you have to be really clear what professional level of skills you need, what bundle of skills you need to be professionally competitive, as opposed to just learning how to do something, which is basic literacy and not skill and competency, okay? Now, most people would not be happy if they never got hired. So clearly, even if you learn to code, whatever that means, and you learned a lot of things, right? And you pass tests so you can build a small application. If your goal is to get hired and you never get hired, then you kind of haven't achieved the real goal behind the goal, which is why making specific goals are really important. The next thing is M, measurable, right? So it actually links into specific when you think about it. Measurable means you need to know whether you've achieved it or not, or you need to know, for example, if you're trying to build muscle or lose weight or gain size or lose size, you want to take quantitative measurements, right? I want to weigh this many kilos or this many pounds. I want to go up to that. I want to go down to this, right? Whatever it is, it has to be specific and it has to be time bound. The reason is the more time you give yourself, the more likely you're going to quit. That's just the law of nature, right? The more time we give ourselves, the more likely we're going to be distracted or we're going to lose focus or motivation and quit. So we want to be as uncomfortably short a time frame as possible so that it feels that it's really going to be hard to get this. Like it's kind of unlikely, okay? But kind of achievable at the same time, which is the next point, right? So you want to put yourself under a little bit of pressure, stretch yourself so that you get the best out of yourself, but at the same time have it as short a time period as possible so that you stay focused. Now, the more pressure you feel, not bad pressure, good pressure, the more likely you are to stay focused and not be distracted. So that's really what good goals look like. Now, what sort of goal is worth setting when it comes to becoming a programmer, or becoming a coder, becoming a full stack developer, becoming a back-end engineer, becoming a data scientist, becoming a data analyst, becoming an AI engineer, whatever it is, becoming a musician, whatever you want to be, a chef, doesn't matter. The goal has got to be smart. And what that actually means is you got to know exactly what outcome you want. Learning to code is not an outcome. It's just a thing you've done. Or the outcome is getting a job, getting hired, playing professionally, or building your startup, an MVP. These are specific outcomes, right? When do you want to achieve that by? So that's the second thing. What? The specific outcome. When by? How you plan to get from here to there. Think about it like navigation. We'll talk about that in a moment. This is where you are now. That specific outcome is point B. You're at point A. How do you get from A to B? And how do you know that you've achieved it? Now, we've already talked about that. How do we know we've achieved it? But you have to know because it's something objectively verifiable. That's not a question of your opinion or not. It's not an opinion that you're a developer or not. The markets confirms that you're a developer, professional developer, sorry. It's not just your opinion that, hey, I have professional developer skills. No. Have you got offers? Have you worked professionally as a developer? Technically, I would say you haven't achieved a professional outcome until you get hired. You may have the skills, but you've not got the outcome yet, right? That's the next step. So that's the kind of goal worth setting. So don't think that you want to learn to code. It's a bad goal. Think instead that you want to be this kind of professional, okay? And how do you build a plan? So this is the last piece that a lot of people struggle with. And I'll be honest, guys, it's not possible to talk about this in just a couple of hours because building a plan is very individual. Why? For example, if I say, hey, which direction to London? A lot of you are going to say north, but it's north if you're south of London. If you're in the US, it's kind of north and east. If you're in Europe, it could be north, northwest. For me, it's kind of northwest if you look at the map because I'm based in Australia. But if you're in Norway or the north of Finland, it's south. So everybody's starting point is very relevant when deciding what the plan is, okay? Because direction is more important than speed. I'm going to bang on about this, I swear, till the day I die, guys. Direction is more important than speed, okay? Direction is much more important for a plan than speed is. So what then is a plan? A plan is a sequence of steps, a collection of sub-goals, if you like, which is how I've expressed it here, because we know how to set proper goals. Now you need to set sub-goals, and a collection of sub-goals that reliably delivers you to your parent goal, which I should say here is the outcome, the specific outcome that you want, right? That's the parent goal. If your collection of sub-goals reliably delivers you to your specific outcome, that's a plan. And each of the sub-goals become like waypoints on a map for those of you familiar with that. But basically, they're a collection of points in your journey that you can trace and see the path from A to B. That's what a good plan looks like. You need to be able to know and how it's going to get you to your destination. And the important thing here is the sequence of steps that needs to be taken. Just like making a cake, a recipe. You mix around the steps, you'll get a completely different thing or you'll screw up the recipe. So the order of steps is very important as well. A good plan will take you in a reliable way to your outcome in the correct sequence of steps that you have to undertake. And a good plan will give you confidence. A bad plan will give you no confidence or less confidence. And the less confident you are about your plan, the more likely you're going to switch. So for those of us, and I'm guilty of this too, who switch around a lot, this is because we don't have confidence in the plan. So when I notice that I'm wanting to switch around a little bit, when I'm trying to learn something new, I immediately recognize that as a symptom of a weak plan, which means rather than switch around, I need to spend more time doing the research to build the plan correctly, to make it specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, time bound, etc. Okay, so hope that helps. Please do not set your goal as learning to code, especially if you're a career changer. This is very different if you're in uni and you're a student. Okay, there's not a lot of information and data you have, no track record. But for those of you who are doing the risky business of changing your career, letting go of your past investments of time and effort and taking a risk of a new career, you have to be really, really clear what the goal is. You have to have a really solid plan, because not having the right plan means you're going to either destroy your confidence, destroy your outcome, or worst of all, quit and lose respect for yourself, or lose confidence in yourself or faith in yourself. Okay. So when you're changing careers, take the planning stage extremely seriously. As Abraham Lincoln said, if I had 5 hours to cut down a tree and 1 axe, I would spend 4 hours sharpening the axe before I started hacking at the tree, right? So do the plan right. Be very specific, make sure outcomes are measurable and you know exactly when they've happened. It's not a question of opinion. And then just build the right sequence. If you don't know how to do this, and that's perfectly okay, we could all technically grow our own food rather than go to the supermarket and buy it. But hey, I'll be honest, I don't know how to do stuff like that. So I'm just going to go and buy it. Okay. If you need to go and get help, there's no shame in that. At least you're smart enough to know you need the help and you're smart enough to back yourself. The right plan is what's going to get you the outcome, not just hard work. Because you know what? You can move in the wrong direction, work as hard as you want, spend as much time as you want, sacrifice time away from your family, do whatever you like, sacrifice your weekends. But if you're going in the wrong direction, you will never get to your goal. So you have to have the right plan and the right recipe. Hope that helps, guys. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. I'll put this document also in the comments so you can refer to it and you can take advantage of it when you're coming up with your plan. All the best and stay in touch.
Do it. Just subscribe. You know you got to do it.